You didn't arrive at this question by accident. Something inside you has been quietly comparing two inner worlds, two ancient voices, two different languages. Yet, somehow, they feel like they are pointing to the same invisible place inside your chest. And maybe you couldn't quite explain why, but you felt it. A strange familiarity, like hearing a truth spoken by two strangers who have never met, yet somehow share the same soul. You notice it when you read about Stoicism, the calm acceptance, the emphasis on inner control, the refusal to collapse under chaos. And then you notice it again when you read Indian philosophy, detachment without indifference, action without attachment, peace that does not depend on circumstances. Different words, different cultures, different centuries, yet the emotional temperature is identical. The same quiet fire, the same grounded stillness, the same whisper beneath suffering. You are more than what happens to you. And if you've been hurting lately, if life has felt heavier than usual, if you've been searching for something solid in a world that feels increasingly unstable, this realization doesn't just feel interesting, it feels relieving, like discovering that the path you've been walking alone has been walked before, not once, but many times, across civilizations, across lifetimes, across human hearts. Let's talk about why Stoicism sounds exactly like Indian philosophy, not academically, not philosophically, but emotionally, humanly, quietly. Here's a truth most people don't say out loud. You're not struggling because you're broken, you're struggling because you're awake. Because at some level, you've noticed something deeply uncomfortable. Life does not arrange itself around your comfort. People change, dreams shift, bodies age, plans collapse, certainties dissolve. And once you've seen this, you can't unsee it. A part of you keeps asking, how do I live in a world that won't promise me stability? How do I love, work, hope, and care without constantly drowning in fear of loss? This is not a modern question. It's ancient, older than any smartphone, older than any empire, older than any religion. It's the question of being human. Stoicism answers it one way, Indian philosophy answers it another. But when you listen closely, they are answering the same ache. Both traditions begin with the same uncomfortable acknowledgement. You do not control most of what happens to you. Not your birth, not your genetics, not the era you live in, not the weather, not the economy, not when someone decides to leave, not when illness arrives, not when death knocks. At first, this realization feels cruel. It can feel like abandonment, like standing in the rain with no umbrella. But then something subtle happens. Both Stoicism and Indian philosophy gently turn your face toward a different question. If I cannot control the world, what can I control? And the answer in both traditions is almost identical. Your inner response, your interpretation, your relationship with what happens. Not the event, but your experience of the event. This is where power quietly shifts. Not loud power, not dominating power, not controlling power, but a soft, steady power. The kind that doesn't scream, the kind that doesn't flex, the kind that simply remains. You start to realize life is not asking you to become invulnerable. Life is asking you to become inwardly anchored. There's a moment many people experience but rarely talk about. A moment when distraction stops working. Entertainment feels hollow. Achievements feel thin. Validation feels temporary. You might still smile. You might still function, but inside, something feels unsatisfied, not in a dramatic way, not in a tragic way, more like a quiet, persistent emptiness, a sense that you're living on the surface of yourself. This is often where people reach for philosophies, not because they want to sound intelligent, but because they're tired of carrying pain without a map, tired of reacting to everything, tired of being emotionally yanked around by circumstances. Stoicism says, stop outsourcing your peace. Indian philosophy says, stop identifying with what is impermanent. Different sentences, same medicine. Both traditions make a radical claim. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not your body. You are not your social identity. You are the awareness experiencing all of it. This idea sounds simple, almost too simple. But if you sit with it long enough, it becomes destabilizing, in a good way. Because if you are the observer, then you are not destroyed by what you observe. Sadness can pass through you without becoming you. Anger can visit without owning you. Fear can arise without defining you. Stoicism calls this maintaining inner sovereignty. Indian philosophy calls this recognizing the true self. Emotionally, they feel the same, like stepping half a step back from the chaos of your own mind, not suppressing, not denying, not numbing, just witnessing. Both traditions are often misunderstood as emotionally cold. People hear words like detachment and imagine indifference. They hear acceptance and imagine passivity. They hear non-attachment and imagine apathy. But neither Stoicism nor Indian philosophy teaches you to stop caring. They teach you to stop clinging. There's a massive difference. Clinging says, I cannot survive if this leaves. Caring says, I cherish this while it exists. Stoicism says, love fully but remember everything is temporary. Indian philosophy says, act with devotion but release attachment to outcome. Same heartbeat, different phrasing. It's not about becoming less human, it's about becoming less terrified of being human. You've probably noticed something painful about modern life. We're taught to build our identity on unstable ground. Be your job. Be your relationship. Be your success. Be your appearance. Be your productivity. And then we're shocked when we feel empty. Shocked when anxiety becomes constant. Shocked when depression creeps in. But how could it not? When you build your sense of self on things that change, you live in a permanent state of subconscious fear. Stoicism says, do not place your identity in what can be taken from you. Indian philosophy says, do not confuse the temporary with the eternal. Same warning, same compassion. Both are quietly saying, you deserve a deeper home than external conditions. Here's where both traditions become deeply practical. They don't just describe reality, they give you a way to walk through it, a way to live, a way to suffer less, not zero suffering, not utopian bliss, but less unnecessary suffering. Stoicism trains you to ask, is this within my control? If yes, then act. If no implies release. Indian philosophy trains you to ask, is this part of the changing world? If yes implies witness. If no implies rest in awareness. Different tools, same outcome. Notice something important. Neither philosophy promises happiness, they promise clarity, and clarity paradoxically often produces a quieter, sturdier form of peace than happiness ever could. Happiness is emotional weather, peace is climate. Stoicism doesn't say, you will feel good all the time. Indian wisdom never made that promise either. They say, you will stop being enslaved by how you feel. That's a very different promise. You may be carrying grief right now, or regret, or loneliness, or exhaustion, or the dull ache of not knowing what you're doing with your life. Both traditions look at you gently and say, of course you feel this way. Not judgment, not blame, not shame, understanding. Because suffering isn't a personal failure, it's a consequence of being conscious in an impermanent world. That alone can soften something inside you. You're not defective, you're human. One of the deepest overlaps between Stoicism and Indian philosophy is their relationship with death. Not morbid, not obsessed, honest. They both treat death as a teacher, not to terrify you, but to clarify you. When you truly accept that everything ends, you stop postponing your soul, you stop assuming you have endless tomorrows, you start paying attention, you start choosing more deliberately, you start loving more honestly. Death, in both traditions, isn't an enemy. It's a reminder. Use this breath well. Neither Stoicism nor Indian philosophy tries to make you extraordinary. They try to make you stable, grounded, sane, present, whole. If you sit with this long enough, a strange realization emerges. These philosophies weren't created by people who escaped suffering. They were created by people who sat inside suffering long enough to understand it. Which is why they don't offer slogans. They offer companionship. A sense that someone, somewhere, once felt what you're feeling now, and found a way to breathe again. That matters more than we admit. Let me say something gently. You don't need to convert. You don't need to label yourself. You don't need to pick a philosophical team. You don't need to master ancient texts. You don't need to become spiritual. You don't need to become stoic. You only need to start noticing. Noticing when you're fighting reality. Noticing when you're attaching your worth to outcomes. Noticing when your mind is catastrophizing. Noticing when you're being cruel to yourself. That noticing alone is already the path. If you're tired, you don't need to become someone else. If you're broken, you don't need to be fixed. If you're lost, you don't need a perfect map. You need gentleness. You need patience. You need to stop attacking yourself for being in process. Both traditions would look at you with immense compassion and say, slow down, breathe. You're allowed to be unfinished. Here's what you need to understand. The truth beneath all of this. They weren't trying to build belief systems. They were trying to ease human suffering, quietly, patiently, one mind at a time, one heart at a time, including yours. You're not behind. You're not defective. You're not failing. You're waking up. And waking up is rarely comfortable, but it is honest. And honesty eventually becomes peace. So tonight, if your mind feels heavy, if your chest feels tight, if your life feels uncertain, place a hand on your heart, take one slow breath, and remember, you are not alone in this experience. You are walking a path humans have walked for millennia. You are allowed to take it slowly. You are allowed to be gentle. You are allowed to rest inside yourself. Nothing else is required. Just this breath, just this moment, just you, here, still breathing, still trying, still worthy, and that is enough.